mad. Yeah. Yeah, Dad's moving too. It's finally our chance to. He said, "I'm not moving to Illinois, and you're not moving to California, so it's either Alabama or Texas." Right. How your parents both gone, right? How much? She's out east. Yeah. Oh, sure. That was the thing with my dad is he's alive.
So if you've never been to it, you need to come. If you've been to it, I don't have to tell you need to come because you know you need to come. So it is Friday, October 22nd. Notice that I spelled hayride correctly this week. I had some people tell me that hayride is not two words. And I said, hey, it's a ride. But come. If you've never been there, come. It's a great time for us to all get together. So we're going to start. I'm not supposed to start for another minute. So.
I lost the. All right, I think I can go ahead and get started. Welcome to week 6 of Evolution Is. Let me remind you again what evolution is, because I want us to focus on this is what they have to defend, and this is what I'm speaking against. So evolution is the belief that all living organisms have a single common ancestor, which itself came from non-living matters. For the last 3 weeks, I've been talking about the fact that evolution is unscientific. I spent a week talking about the fact that evolution has no mechanism, and therefore it is unscientific. And then I spent 2 weeks talking about the fact that evolution cannot explain any biological novelty. Evolution is great at explaining extinction, but that's not really the issue. The issue is, where does all the new stuff come from? And evolution cannot do that. It does rely on storytelling. There's a lot of just so stories that are associated with evolution, but also this week I want to talk about the fact that evolution relies upon mysticism. Now, if you have really good memory, you might remember that last week that said magic. So I changed the word. As I was preparing this week, I think mysticism applies a little bit better, so I changed it to mysticism. All right, so what am I talking about here? I showed you this slide before, Biologists universally agree that the living world around us looks like it was designed. Even the evolutionists will admit that. It looks like it was designed. They have two ways of dealing with that. The Richard Dawkins group says it looks like it was designed, but in fact that's just an illusion. It's not really designed. That is one way that they deal with the design that they see in nature. But there's another way that evolutionists will deal with this fact, besides denying that it's actual design. They will in fact admit that when they look at the world around us, it looks like it was designed, and in fact it was designed. But the designer wasn't God. So who was the designer? Well, this is where the mysticism comes in. Mother Nature and Father Time. So I want to talk about Mother Nature first of all, then we'll talk about Father Time. It is not unusual. It shocks me every time I see it, and it probably shouldn't, but it's not unusual to be reading through a science book or go to a museum and come across something that attributes design to Mother Nature. This is from a college-level biology textbook. Mother Nature's designed for feeding horses. They don't deny that it's design, it certainly is, but who do they attribute that design to? Mother Nature, whatever that means. Now, if you said, replace Mother Nature up there with God, there would be some screaming. There'd be some howling. That doesn't belong in a science textbook. You can't say that. But if you say Mother Nature, that's okay. And this is not a one-off. This is not just a single occurrence. This happens all the time. It would be a very easy thing for you to do to go home this afternoon and type in to your browser something about biomimicry, and you would find lots and lots of articles, and they're very interesting articles generally. They talk about the fact that engineers are trying to solve very difficult problems. And sometimes they have no idea what to do. And so one of the things that they will do is they will look around at the natural world around us, and they will see how plants or animals handle some of the situations that they're trying to handle. And then what they do is they try to mimic that in the laboratory. And they've come up with some really great discoveries by doing that. So this one particular article is entitled Mimicry Design, Mother Nature's Influence on Products and Design. Again, they don't deny the design. They don't deny that it's useful. It's terribly useful for designing all kinds of things. Who do they attribute the design to? Mother Nature. That's okay. Interesting article. There's lots and lots and lots of examples that you can find about this, but they don't always have pictures associated with them. So I put some on this one just because they did have some pictures. It is not a coincidence that a photo of a bird of prey in flight looks like the side view of a bomber. That's not a coincidence. Another example of biomimicry would be this. On the left is a prototype concept car that is being designed, and on the right is the tropical fish that was used as the model for the design. This kind of thing is done all the time by engineers. They admit that there's great design there. It's better design ideas than they can come up with, so they try to mimic it as best they can. But the thing is, they attribute the design to Mother Nature, not to God. I went to the Shedd Aquarium, and many of you have probably been to the Shedd Aquarium in Chicago. It's a wonderful place to go. And I was there a few years ago, and they had a big open area where they had a big display about crabs. I don't think it's it's there all the time, but it was there one time when I was there. And crabs are delicious. So I definitely wanted to go through this. I was interested. And as I went through, I found all kinds of posters and banners that said things like this. Crabs are amazing machines. I can't read this very well, but I'll see what I can do. Crabs have all the right equipment. Crabs are marvels of engineering, it says. Here's another poster. Discover how crabs are engineered to survive on land and in streams, lakes, and seas. Well, they're engineered. Clearly, they're designed. And who was the designer? Well, you know who the designer was. Nobody builds them better than Mother Nature. Posters like this all over the Shedd Aquarium. See, if you said nobody builds them better than God, that would be totally unacceptable. But that would be actually attributing the design to where it actually came from. But this is acceptable in a science building or a science article. Really, it's hypocrisy. Because if you're not going to allow the saying that God did it, then you shouldn't be allowing this either. I actually found a card, and this is what it said on the card, and it struck me as being strange but true for some people. It said, "I believe in God, only I spell it Nature." That's essentially what they're doing. As long as you don't use God, it's going to be acceptable in the class. All right, that's Mother Nature, but the other side of this design argument is the other half of the designer is Father Time. And this is the default go-to fallback position for evolutionists. If you've had a discussion with an evolution, if you corner them on anything, you know what their trump card's going to be, right? Time. So I got to tell you, the next quote is one of the most interesting quotes I have ever found. And I found that I wasn't looking for it, but years ago I was actually trying to do some reading on the early origin of life research. I was telling you about the Urey Miller experiments that were done in the early 1950s. And I found out that there was an article that was written in Scientific American in 1954 that had really good information about these early experiments. And I wanted to read it myself. I didn't want to just take other people's word for what was in there. It was very difficult to find the article, but finally I was able to find it someplace on microfiche. And so I was able to read the article. And this was a quote from the article. "Time is in fact the hero of the plot. Given so much time, the impossible becomes possible, the possible probable, and the probable virtually certain. One only has to wait. Time itself performs the miracles." Okay, now there is a logical fallacy in here, so I'll give you a couple seconds to see if you can find it. Do you see a logical issue or problem with any of that? It's on the second and third line where it says the impossible becomes possible. What does impossible mean? Not possible. Okay, so if the not possible became possible, then it was possible in the first place, and it wasn't impossible. So there's a movie from a long time ago, and I won't name the movie, but some of you will know exactly what I'm talking about. There's several scenes in the movie where this one guy keeps saying, "Inconceivable!" And then this other guy finally turns to him and says, "I do not think that word means what you think it means." And if George Wald was here, and I'm sure he's dead by this point, but if he were here, I would say, the word impossible, I do not think it means what you think it means. If you go to the very end there, one has only to wait, time itself performs the miracle. So this is the trump card for evolution. When all else fails, boom, pull out the trump card and win the hand. And it's regularly used. I was giving a talk at the library one time, and it ended up being a longer talk than I originally intended for it to be. So when I got there, I said, "Look, I'm going to talk for 50 minutes. Then I'm going to take a break for 10 minutes, and then I'm going to talk for 50 more minutes. If you're still here after that, I'll take questions." So I talked for 50 minutes, I took a break, I went into the bathroom, and while I was in there, I had a conversation with a guy in there who was washing his hands. And it started very nicely. He said, "I've enjoyed your talk so far." That was very nice because, when you give a talk to generally speaking, a hostile audience, it is nice to have a few people in the audience, who give you a little smile and a little thumbs up. And so, that's encouraging. And so he said, "I've enjoyed your talk so far." And I was like, "Oh, good." And then he said, "But we must remember that 1 billion years is an unimaginably long time." He played the trump card. Okay? What he was saying was, "Look, I have no arguments for what you've been saying. I can't argue against it. But you know what? Trump card. 1 billion years is all I have to say, and I win the argument." What he was really saying was this: given enough time, the impossible becomes possible, the possible becomes probable, and the probable becomes inevitable. That's what he was saying. I was having a conversation with a biology professor, and normally when I have a discussion with somebody, I like to ask questions. That's really a good thing to do because very quickly you can demonstrate to them that they can't answer the questions. So usually I will do that. But in this particular case, I might have been in a hurry, I don't know, and I basically just said, you can't do this, you can't do this, you can't do this, and I just gave him a long list of things that he had no explanation for. He didn't argue against me. He didn't say, you're wrong, and let me show you why. He just sat there and listened. And so when I finished, this is what he responded with. Give me 1,000,000 years. And what was he saying? I'll translate for you. He was saying, given enough time, the impossible becomes possible, the possible becomes probable, and the probable becomes inevitable. That's what he was saying. So here we have these two designers, and this is who they give credit to instead of God, who really was the designer. There's a verse in Isaiah 42:8, which is applicable here. It says, I am the Lord, that is my name, I will not give my glory to another. So evolution is unscientific because it doesn't have mechanisms. It's unscientific because they can't explain novelty. They rely on storytelling and trump cards for every time they get cornered into something. But there's another reason that evolution is unscientific, and that is how evolution is defended. If you think about how evolution is defended, there are several different ways in which it's defended, and every one of them is unscientific. So evolution is defended by making inflated claims, rejecting all criticism, and attacking others. So I'm going to start today with evolution is defended by making inflated claims. Let's look at some of the inflated claims of evolution. To me, the very biggest one is this one. Human and chimp DNA is 99% the same. I was in school in the late 60s and early 70s, and this was what we were told in our biology classes, that human and chimp DNA is 99% the same. This figure came from an article that was printed in one scientific journal, but it was picked up and then it was just repeated over and over and over again in our science classes. I believe, and this is just my opinion, that this probably convinced more people that evolution was true than any other thing. Because essentially they said, we're 99% the same as chimps? We didn't come from chimps. We must have a recent ancestor that was an ancestor between us and the chimps. That would be the most reasonable explanation they would say. The only problem with this is it isn't true. Human DNA and chimp DNA are not 99% the same. The Human Genome Project wasn't even thought about at this point. We didn't know what the human DNA genome looked like. We certainly didn't know what the chimp DNA genome looked like. So how in the world could they say that they were 99% the same? Well, this was based on an experiment. If you want to know more about the experiment, I can talk to you about it afterwards. But essentially, they boiled DNA like you would boil spaghetti. And then they measured some bonds, and they irradiated some of the DNA, and then they drew conclusions from what they saw. And their conclusion was this. Well, of course, they wanted that number to be 99%. So that's what they came up with. Now, as you go into the 80s and the 90s, that number slipped a little bit. You'll find that they were not saying it was 98%. In fact, they were saying it was 98%. Now you say, well, that's almost 99%. It's really the same thing. Well, no, think of it from the other perspective. You just went from 1% different to 2% different. You just doubled the differences. That's a huge difference, especially when you're talking about DNA is 3.2 billion base pairs. 2% of that is a lot. But you are not 98% the same as a chimpanzee. Okay? Let's fast forward into the 2000s. What are they reporting now? Well, most of the things I've seen are now reporting that we are 95% the same as a chimp. Now, that's a huge difference from 99% to 98%. I'll tell you right now, spoiler alert, we're not 95% the same as a chimpanzee. All right, but at least now, for the very first time, they're actually comparing human DNA to the chimp DNA. And they found it was 95% the same? No. Okay. The way you compare the DNA is 4 letters, A, C, T, and G. You have a long stream of letters for the human DNA, and you've got a long stream of letters for the chimp DNA. You just slide them past each other, and you compare them. And whatever the highest, when you hit with the highest percent, that must have been the ones where they belong together. And so when they do this, they get 95%, right? No. It's a lot more complicated than that. First of all, it is absolutely impossible to compare the entire human genome to the entire chimp genome. That's not possible. You know, billions of comparisons. You go, well, we have supercomputers that can do that. No, we don't, because you have to understand that this is being done in a very complicated way. They don't just slide them past each other and compare. They believe in insertions and deletions. So what that means is that in the human DNA and in the chimp DNA, there are different places where little pieces of the DNA has been removed. So what they have to do is they have to just go in lots of places and remove things and slide them past each other. And over here, you got to remove some things. But not just remove, you have to insert things. So you insert things and remove things and you can do that billions of ways at each position. And then you shift it one, and now you have to do it billions of ways again. Billions. And then you shift it one, and you have to do it billions of ways again. So they literally have compared only very, very, very small amounts of DNA together. It sounds like when you read these things, you think they've compared the entire genome. No, they haven't. They can't. It's not possible to do. So what they've done is, so you say, well, what did they compare? This is where the fix comes in. What they do is they'll take a strand of DNA, which they know what it codes for in humans, like, for example, blood clotting. And then they'll go to the chimp, and they'll find a strand of DNA that blood clots. So they do the same thing, and then that's the strands that they will compare. And shocking, they come out pretty similar. Well, that's because they do similar things, so it's not very surprising that they would, in fact, be similar. So what you can actually say, and this would be absolutely the best thing you could say, but they don't say this, is that where the chimp DNA and the human DNA are similar, they are about 95% similar. Where they're similar. If you pay attention to what I'm saying, what are they not comparing? Where they're different. They're just completely pretending it doesn't exist. There's large areas of DNA in the human and the chimp DNA genome that are different from each other, but they don't pay attention to those because that's where they're different. So they're only paying attention to the similarities, and then they report things like this. But it's not 99%, it's not 98%, and it's not 95%. Okay? So if you don't remember anything else, here's something you can remember. Here's a question you can ask. How could human and chimp DNA be 99% or 98% or even 95% the same when chimps have 10% more DNA than humans do? Did you know that chimps have more DNA than we do? That's surprising to a lot of people, but they do. But if they have 10% more, how could the number 99 be right or 98 be right? It can't be. But it's very difficult to even say what it means to say the percent similarity when you're not working with the same number of things. That's a problem. And so basically what they're doing is they're just ignoring the places where they're really different, and then they get numbers like this. But it has convinced generations of people that evolution is true. And it's a vastly overstated claim. I'll give you another example. I talked about this one a few weeks ago. I talked about the fact that Grant went to the Galapagos Islands and he studied the finches, and he published an article about how the average finch beak size seemed to be changing from year to year depending upon how much precipitation there had been. So on wet years, the average finch beak size was lower, smaller, and on dry years it was higher. And I talked about the fact that Grant himself said that this was oscillation. And he thought it was natural selection, and whether it is or not, I don't care, because this is not showing change accumulating. It's showing change canceling each other out. You know, it's just going up, it's going down. That's called oscillation. So this doesn't really back evolution up at all. But this is typically given in biology textbooks as a classic example of evolution. Now, there's more going on here, and that's why I've got the slide back up here again. This is right out of a biology textbook. Do you notice anything about this graph? Now, I'm a mathematician, so something jumped out to me immediately, but I'm not sure everybody would see it. If you look on the y-axis, the vertical axis, do you notice where it starts? It doesn't start at 0. It starts at 7.5. They didn't put 7.5 there, but it's starting at 7.5. What does that do to the graph? Yeah, it distorts the graph is what it does. And it distorts the graph in a way that they wanted the graph to be distorted, right? Because they wanted you to see these swings that were going on here. These swings, how big are they? Well, it's hard to know, for Americans to know anyway, because the units given on the left were given in metric. And we're good Americans, and we don't know what metric means. So, we look at this, we're like, I don't know. Well, let me go ahead and tell you, the swing from the smallest average beak size to the largest average beak size was 1/60th of an inch. There is no possible way that Grant would actually have seen this if he hadn't been keeping very accurate records and then graphing this very accurately. There's no way you'd notice this at all. He certainly didn't notice it. It's not like he said, I've noticed the birds are bigger this year. That didn't happen. 1/60th of an inch. That is the thickness of your fingernail. Not the width of your fingernail, the thickness of your fingernail. And yet somehow this is a classic example of evolution that's in the textbooks. The thickness of your fingernail? That's an inflated claim. The State Journal Register, I'm not terribly disappointed that the paper has pretty much died. They published an editorial in October of 2005, and this is what they said in their editorial. If America is to keep pace in the world of science, it needs to first accept evolution as the cornerstone of science that it is. The cornerstone of science. I'm used to people saying evolution is the most important thing in biology. I'll argue with that, but I can see why somebody might say that. But the cornerstone of all of science? They went on in this article to say the following. There was a 600-word editorial, and they referred to evolution as the cornerstone of science, the foundation of science, the most fundamental principle in all of life science, the bedrock of modern science. I got it the first time. You didn't need to tell me that 5 times. Why didn't you use your 600 words to say it once and then give me examples of why you think that's true? Because they didn't anywhere in the article. They just beat you over the head over and over and over again with, this is the most important thing in science. How could you deny this? That's what they were doing. Another example of this is I read an article one time, and in this article they claimed that we won the space race to the moon because of evolution. And I kind of boggled my mind a little bit. Their argument went something like this. Well, we started teaching more evolution in the schools in the 60s, and the space race was during the 60s, and we won the space race. Therefore, draw your own conclusion, right? Let's think about that for a second. Who was the space race with? Russia. And we had barely been teaching evolution in the schools before the 60s, and we started teaching a little bit more in the 60s. But what had they been teaching exclusively in the schools in Russia since the 1920s? Evolution. I mean, it seems like the creationists beat the evolutionists to the moon, if you want to think about it like that. I mean, to take that as an example of how evolution is responsible for every great achievement that science has ever made is ridiculous. They have gotten to the point where they've basically made science equivalent to evolution and evolution equivalent to science. So to deny evolution in their mind is to deny all of science. And I've actually had people say, why do you deny all of science to me? Well, that's ridiculous. I'm really good at science. If I was not so good in mathematics, I would have become a physicist, or I would have gone into astronomy, because I was interested in astronomy as well. But I was just better in math, and so I went into mathematics. But I love science, and I think science is great, and I think science has done good things, bad things too, but science has done good things for us. But science is not an equivalent word for the word evolution. We're talking about inflated claims here, right? So This is one that was from February 26, 2019. On that day, was it 2 years ago, NASA released a press release. And this is what it was entitled. NASA was able to recreate the origins of life, and the results are shocking. On the first line of the press release, it said, "A new NASA study has recreated the origins of life." Now, I think you can be forgiven if you read this article and thought that NASA had recreated the origins of life. Because, that's what it said in the heading, and that's what it said on the first line. Has NASA recreated the origins of life? You know the answer is no. Let me read more. A new NASA study has recreated the origins of life, building the ocean's floor from 4 billion years ago. Barge and her team were able to recreate the seafloor by filling beakers with mixtures that were similar to the primordial ocean, including water, minerals, and ammonia and pyruvate that are generally located near hydrothermal vents. The mixture was heated to 158 degrees Fahrenheit, the oxygen was removed, and then they added iron hydroxide, or green rust, which was abundant in the early days of the planet. The green rust reacted with the traces of oxygen that were left, which produced the amino acid alanine and the alpha hydroxy acid lactate. Some researchers believe that these could combine like Legos and create further complex molecules, which then could be a precursor of life. Okay, now, there's an issue with this that if I didn't point it out, you might miss, so I am going to point it out. It's in the middle of the paragraph here. In about halfway down, it says, the mixture was heated to 158 degrees, the oxygen was removed. Now, oxygen was removed because oxygen in the early parts of these experiments actually prevents the experiment from occurring. So they remove the oxygen, and the reasoning that they have for that is they'll say there was no oxygen in the early atmosphere. Now, clearly there was oxygen, the element oxygen, but it was in water and water vapor and maybe some carbon dioxide, but not free oxygen. So that's why they find it acceptable to remove the oxygen. But you go down the next sentence, what happens? The green rust reacted with the traces of the oxygen that were left. What oxygen that was left? Oh, they added oxygen back into the experiment. Remember I talked about this before? This is what they'll do. They have to interfere with the experiment at every stage to get it to do what they want it to do. And NASA's doing the exact same. This was a group that NASA was paying for the funding for, but this is what they did. They're interfering with the experiment, and then they're supposed to be demonstrating that all of this could have happened without any outside interference. But it doesn't work that way. So they needed the oxygen at a later point. They just added the oxygen. We'll explain why later on. At the very end here, though, notice again at the beginning it says they've recreated the origins of life, but what actually did they produce? Some amino acids. Did they produce proteins? No. They produced amino acids and a few other things that might be able to be put together like Legos to form more complex molecules, which themselves would be the precursors of life. So did they create life? No. Did they create the precursors of life? No. They created the precursors of life. And yet, most people that read this, well, I honestly believe that most students, if you ask them, have they created life in a laboratory? Absolutely. They're convinced that they have. They're not even close to it. But what can a scientist who believes in evolution do that a scientist who believes in creation cannot do? That's a really good question. I ask this question to people sometimes. Get tenure. That's actually a good answer. You might be right on that one. In fact, you are right on that. If you don't know who Francis Crick is, Francis Crick has passed away now, but he's an important person. He was a very influential scientist, very good scientist. He's an evolutionist. You should know him because he, along with Watson, were the two co-discoverers of the double helix nature of DNA. So that's a big deal. And this guy's an important guy. And he wrote an article, he wrote something called What Mad Pursuit. And in this he said, biologists must constantly keep in mind that what they see was not designed, but rather evolved. Now just think about that for a second. Why do they have to keep reminding themselves that what they see was not designed, but rather it evolved? because their observations are telling them that it was designed. So they have to go ignore your observations, stick with the facts. It evolved, right? That's kind of what he's saying here. But he goes on. A lot of people have seen this quote, but what a lot of people don't know is what the context of this quote was. So let me read further. It might be thought, therefore, that evolutionary arguments would play a large part in guiding biological research. But that is far from the case. It is difficult enough to study what is happening now. To figure out exactly what happened in evolution is even more difficult. Thus, evolutionary achievements can be used as hints to suggest possible lines of research, but it's highly dangerous to trust them too much. So they don't actually use their evolutionary views to determine what type of research they're going to do. Philip Skell wrote an article in The Scientist called "Why Do We Invoke Darwin?" And in this article, he said, "My own research with antibiotics received no guidance from insights provided by Darwinian evolution. I recently asked more than 70 eminent researchers if they would have done their work differently if they had thought Darwin's theory was wrong, and the responses were all the same: no." There is a biologist, local, so he's local, and I'm not going to use his name. I'm not trying to make fun of him. But he wrote a review of one of my talks one time, and in that he said, I'm not sure always how to explain exactly how an evolutionary background would help, but it is relevant. If you have your PhD in biology and you can't explain exactly how an evolutionary background would help, it doesn't. So the answer to this question is nothing. Michael Shermer is, this is not a random person who's making this claim here. He says, as soon as the creation of even one species is attributed to supernatural intervention, natural laws and inferences about the working nature become void. In each case, all science becomes meaningless. These are the kinds of claims that are ridiculous, inflated claims about the world. Michael Shermer is probably the most important skeptic in the United States and maybe the world. He's the head of an organization of skeptics and has a magazine called Skeptic Magazine. So what's wrong with this? This is demonstrably wrong. If he were here, I would simply point out to him that every branch of all modern science was formed by people who believe exactly what it says at the top of this. Every branch of modern science was created by people that believed that all species, not just one, all species were attributed to supernatural intervention. And yet he's claiming if that was true for even one of them, all science would become meaningless. No, it wouldn't, and it didn't. All right, so evolution is defended by making inflated claims, and I think I have time to talk about the second part here. Evolution is defended by rejecting all criticism of it. And this you're almost surely aware about. You were talking about a scientist who is a creationist, who is an evolutionist might be able to get tenure, whereas a person who is a creationist may not be able to. Yeah, that has to do with this right here. They reject criticism. Now, the California Science Framework says this in it: scientists should never be told that many scientists think this or that. Science is not decided by vote, but by evidence. Nor should scientists be told what scientists believe. Science is not a matter of belief. Rather, it is a matter of evidence that can be subjected to the test of observation and objective reasoning. Shows students that nothing in science is decided just because someone important says it is so, authority, or because that is the way it has always been done, tradition. I agree with this. I think that's great. What is the one area where they do not apply this? Evolution. That's right, evolution. The only important thing about evolution is that you believe it's true. You don't have to understand it. You don't have to know anything about it. You just got to know it's true, and we'll pass you on to the next course. I have not found that one person in 100 who believes in evolution can adequately defend it. So why do they believe it? Basically because of arguments of authority. Somebody that they looked up to told them it was true, and they believe it's true. All right, now, the National Academy of Science a few years ago released a guidebook for teachers, parents, and school administrators, and it was about evolution and creation. And in it, this is what they said, well, this is part of what they said. There is no debate within the scientific community over whether evolution has occurred. All right, that's just not true. Okay, it's just flat out not true. It's true only in the following sense. It's hard to have a debate if one person won't debate, right? If they just put their fingers in their ears, then you can't really have a debate. But are there scientists, reputable scientists, that believe that evolution is wrong? But tens of thousands of them. Tens of thousands of them. Are there scientists that believe that evolution is probably right, but it really has some real problems associated with it? Tens of thousands of them, right? But you would never know that reading something like this because there is no debate within the scientific community. They'll say things like, denying evolution is like denying gravity. You hear that kind of thing all the time. Okay, if you believe that's true, how about we do the following? You go out and look to see if you can find some scientists that deny gravity, and I'll go out and see if I can find some scientists that deny evolution is true. I will have an easy time of it, and you won't. Several years ago, I decided that I wanted to, just to demonstrate this, I said, I'm going to give myself 1 month, and I'm going to find as many people as I can that are in the science community who would sign a piece of paper that said they had questions about whether evolution was true or not. And in 1 month's time in Springfield alone, because I even got people calling me, can I sign? I'm like, no, you're not from Springfield. I got 100 people in Springfield that were willing to sign that. People in the medical community, lots of them, physicists, mathematicians, computer scientists, biologists, lots of people that I got that were willing to sign this. But yet there's no debate within the scientific community. Ernst Mayr went even further. Ernst Mayr is like the grandfather of evolutionary theory. I shouldn't have said is like, he's dead now, but he lived a long, long time. He lived, I think, over 100 years. And he said this about this whole thing. No educated person today any longer questions the validity of the so-called theory of evolution, which we now know to be a simple fact. See, the National Academy of Sciences, scientists don't question this. But he went further. Educated people don't question this. Okay? So how do they make, well, these claims are clearly not true, but here's what they're actually doing. Right? There's no debate because they're not listening. They're not trying to have a debate. They don't want to. In fact, they lose debates when they have debates because it's very difficult to defend evolution. So they don't debate. The article in the National Guidebook for Teachers, it went on to say, not only is there no debate, there is no evidence that evolution has not occurred. Okay, come on. Really? Any reasonable person that would look at the data, even if you agree that evolution was true, would have to say, yeah, but there's lots of problems. There's lots of evidence that doesn't fit with the view of evolution. We're going to have to continue to work on this because clearly we don't understand it completely. That would be at least an honest view. But to say something like this, there is no evidence that evolution has not occurred, like I haven't been talking about anything for the last 4 weeks, right? Well, all I've been talking about is problems with evolution, but you know, what is this? They got their head in the sand here. They don't want to hear and they don't want to look most of the time at what you're saying. Danny Hollis said this: there is a feeling in biology that scientists should keep their dirty laundry hidden. There is a strong school of thought in biology that one should never question Darwin in public. Sometimes they will question among themselves. You know, they'll go in the back room and they'll discuss and they'll hammer out and they'll fight over something. But in public, they keep a united front. Everybody knows evolution is true. How many of you saw the evolution series on PBS? Oh, not too many of you. Oh, good. It was a puff piece. It was several 1 hour long I can't remember how many, but several 1 hour long presentations that had to do with evolution. And if you watch that entire thing, there was nobody there in the entire thing that said anything contrary to evolution. It was just, you know, kumbaya about evolution. And What you probably don't know is that there was much more going on in the background. When they found out that PBS was going to produce this series on evolution, a group of scientists went to PBS and they said, "We volunteer to be on your show. We will give the opposing point of view. We will give the scientific opposing point of view." And they repeatedly requested to be let on the show. And despite repeated requests, the series producers refused to cover scientific objections to Darwinism. So they didn't even put it in. And so when you watch this, you're thinking, well, there aren't any scientific objections. No, they simply didn't put them in the show. Instead, they did offer to let the scientific dissenters go on camera and tell their personal faith stories in the last program. The last program was What About God? And they're like, oh, you can talk about faith all you want in the last program. So come in and we'll let you talk there. And the scientists were like, we said we wanted to talk about scientific problems with evolution. In fact, several of them said, I have no faith tradition. I'm an atheist or I'm an agnostic. But there are scientific issues with evolution. And they were like, we don't want to hear that. And so they just didn't put it in. Some of you are probably familiar with the Alabama book disclaimer. This was a sticker they made in Alabama. They made them put on the biology textbooks. And this is what it said. Evolution is a controversial theory some scientists present as scientific explanation for the origin of living things such as plants, animals, and humans. Well, that's true. The only thing controversial about that statement is the word controversial. That really is. Other than that, it's just a factual statement. Second statement, no one was present when life first appeared on Earth. That's a factual statement. It's an undeniable factual statement. Third, therefore, any statement about life's origin should be considered as theory and not fact. That's a factual statement. What happened when they put this on the textbooks in Alabama? The evolutionists were livid. Right? Here's Niles Eldredge. With trash like this in our textbooks, okay? Now again, everything about it is undeniably true. With trash like this in our textbooks, and then this is where the inflated claims, watch how he goes right into the, how can we hope to produce a literate society whose citizens are equipped to deal with the complex science and technological related issues of the day? That sticker ruined all of these students in the entire state of Alabama. That's amazing power of a sticker, right? Anyway. Now, it is legal in the public schools to criticize evolution. I don't know if you know that, but it is legal. It is almost never done. So why, if it's legal, is it almost never done? I think the reason goes back to Lavacky. There was a court case in May of 2001 where Lavacky was a science teacher who was a teacher in a school in Minnesota. And he was teaching biology, and he was teaching his students that there were issues associated with evolution, which is, again, legal to do. And he was reported by another teacher to the department chair. Anyway, they basically moved him out of the class, and they said, we're not going to let you teach biology anymore. And so he went to court over this because, it's legal to teach criticism of evolution. And I'm going to read a little part of what the judge ruled. The judge ruled in favor of the school district, not in favor of Lavacky. And let me show you the reasoning. Oops. The classroom is a marketplace of ideas. Sounds like he's going to say, and it's okay, right? And academic freedom should be safeguarded. Again, Lavacky should win. But Lavacky, in his role as a public school teacher rather than as a private citizen, wanted to discuss the criticisms of evolution. Again, what's the problem with that? Accordingly, the established curriculum and Lavacky's responsibility as a public school teacher to teach evolution in the manner prescribed by the curriculum overrides his First Amendment rights as a public citizen. So, they had written the curriculum to say, when you teach evolution, you will teach this, this, and this. Nowhere in there did it say you could criticize evolution. So when he criticized evolution, what he was violating was the curriculum that they had created. And so this judge ruled, well, that's the contract. The curriculum is what you have to do. You violated the curriculum, so therefore, they can remove you from the position. And that's why Lavaki lost. So this is a great trick. All you have to do is get the school districts to remove criticism of, not even mention anything about criticism of evolution. And then if somebody criticizes it, well, then you can flag that and say, you can't do that. That's not in the curriculum. It seems like the only way to get around this would be to get the school district to say that it was actually acceptable to criticize evolution. But try doing that in a school board meeting. At the University of Idaho, this is the president of the University of Idaho. At the University of Idaho, teaching views that differ from evolution, they may occur in faculty-approved curricula in religion, sociology, philosophy, political science. However, teaching such views is inappropriate everywhere where you should be teaching it, in the science classroom. See, in the science classroom, the only dog that's allowed in that fight is the evolution dog. No other dog is allowed. So I'm going to end with this. Jonathan Wells is a scientist, a biologist who works for the Discovery Institute. And he went to a talk given by a Chinese paleontologist who was an expert on the Cambrian fossils. And the scientist pointed out in his talk that the top-down pattern of the Cambrian explosion contradicted Darwin's theory of evolution. So Wells went up to talk to him afterwards, and after the talk, this is the Chinese scientist, told Wells the following. In China, we can criticize Darwin, but not the government. In America, you can criticize the government, but not Darwin.